Battleships are among the most iconic units to have served within any navy across the globe, but these vessels only reigned supreme for approximately 50 years, from the 1890s to the 1940s. And during these 50 years, they had evolved enough to have three distinct eras: pre-dreadnoughts, dreadnoughts, and fast battleships. Of these three eras, the meat can be found within the dreadnought era, as political tensions were at an all-time high, resulting in advances in technology and the expansion of the ship construction industry, which resulted in an enormous number of vessels being produced within a relatively short period of time. As is to be expected within all three eras of battleship construction, there are design faults within every design, but for the Dreadnought era, with its great number of warships, the faults were often covered over. And for today, I wanted to look at what I consider to be some of the worst Dreadnought designs that were actually produced and saw service. The first vessels I wanted to look at today, probably to nobody's surprise, are the Japanese battleships Kawachi and Setsu. The Kawachi class from the outset was effectively doomed to failure for a handful of reasons. Firstly, Japan imported a significant quantity of construction material for major warship construction. For example, the preceding battleship class, the Satsuma class, required roughly 60% of their materials to be imported from foreign countries. This caused two primary issues for the design of warships. Construction was slow, sometimes taking more than 5 years, meaning that by the time the vessels were in service, they were obsolete, and materials had to rely on what foreign countries were able to design and construct, so the actual design of the ships were restricted to foreign products. The second issue was finances. Japan had just come out of war with the Russian Empire, and this had placed its economy under stress. By 1909, they had a deficit of 260 million yen. As a result, spending on the Navy and Army would reduce by approximately 20%. This was the stage that the two vessels would be designed on, with them being ordered in November of 1908 as improved variations of the Satsuma-class battleships. Some positives of the design was, overall, there was a significant increase in armor, as the main belt had a thickness up to 12 inches, the deck had a thickness up to 2 inches, and the barbettes had a thickness up to 11 inches. Another benefit of the design was the devotion to turbine machinery, as a result of experiments conducted on Satsuma and Aki, as Satsuma had reciprocating engines and Aki had turbines. The turbines proved satisfactory, and from this point forward, Japanese battleships would focus primarily on developing turbine machinery. Never again would a reciprocating engine be used. All of that said, the primary advancement of the Dreadnought-era battleships was to increase the firepower of the battleship. In doing so, a main uniform armament would be created, but for the Kawachi, this is where the design greatly failed. Having designed the Kawachi off the Satsuma class, the hexagonal arrangement for the secondary turrets was retained, but rather than mounting 10-inch guns on the wing turrets, they would now be increased to 12-inch guns, creating the uniform bore size between all of the weaponry. The hexagonal arrangement would require the installation of 6 main battery turrets, but at any given time, only 4 could ever be brought to bear on a target. As a result, the Japanese were paying 50% more for the construction of the ship due to the additional artillery, but they could not get the extra benefit of having the 2 additional turrets. An argument placed forward for the hexagonal arrangement was the fact that the vessels could engage targets off both sides, but in a realistic scenario, the fire control systems of these vessels would never have been able to handle firing off both sides of the ship. That means one side would receive fire control, while the other would not. Speaking of fire control, there is another significant issue it had to overcome, and is the primary reason the Kawachis are to be considered among the worst Dreadnought battleships. Due to Japan's struggling economy and the reduction in financing for ship construction, the primary armament had to be sacrificed. Initially, designers wanted a uniform armament of 12 12-inch 50 caliber guns, but due to the expense required for the 50 caliber weapons, the forward and aft turret would receive those, but the 4 wing turrets would receive 12-inch 45 caliber guns, which had different ballistics. This meant that fire control would have to create 2 separate solutions for the main battery, This would slow the progress of creating a target solution for the main battery, and would also make it extraordinarily difficult for fire control to ever zone in on a target at respectable ranges, meaning that the chance of obtaining a hit was greatly reduced for this class compared to foreign counterparts of the same time period. It was a mistake that the Japanese were forced to make as a result of financing, but they had learned their lesson and would never repeat it again. What is interesting about the Kawachis is they actually had foreign counterparts that were very similar in design and also had similar faults. These were the German battleships of the Nassau and Helgoland classes. Unlike the Japanese battleships, the Nassau class would be designed from scratch, meaning they were not based off the preceding pre-dreadnoughts of the Deutschland class, and the Helgolands would be improved variations of the Nassaus. Some benefits to the design was the incorporation of a sophisticated torpedo defense system as a result of Germany's expected reliance in underwater weapon warfare. Some other benefits include overall excellent armor protection and a uniform main battery made up of 12 11-inch 45 caliber guns for the Nassaus and 12 12-inch 50 caliber guns for the Helgolands. Unfortunately, the downsides for these vessels was quite significant. Both classes would utilize the hexagonal turret arrangement, once again meaning that only 4 of the 6 main battery turrets could ever be brought to bear on a target, and fire control could only ever effectively manage one side of the ship. This would once again result in an unnecessary increase in cost and material usage for the vessels, as they could have been designed more efficiently. Another issue that was produced as a result of the hexagonal arrangement was the barbette's interference with the torpedo defense system, as in order to be effective, the torpedo defense system needed as much depth as possible. Normally this would be achieved at the amidship section where the vessel was at its widest, but due to the turrets and their magazines being placed on the wings of the ship, this had reduced the width of the torpedo defense system in their immediate vicinities, decreasing its overall effectiveness. The wing turrets were moved as far inboard as was possible along with their magazines, and the shaping of the magazines was also adjusted in order to give the torpedo defense system as much depth as possible. Finally, I think it's necessary to point out that all of the vessels in both of these classes would utilize reciprocating engines rather than moving over to the more advanced turbine machinery, as Germany was not in a position where it was comfortable installing turbine machinery in its most advanced warships. The first German capital ship to utilize turbine machinery was the battlecruiser von der Thorn, and this is when the true efficiency of the turbine was recognized, along with the reduced vibrations caused by the machinery, which helped fire control remain steady. So far in this video, I've only criticized designs that utilized hexagonal arrangements, which, to be fair, it's an easy arrangement to criticize. But that does not mean the central line arrangement was always superior, as can be seen with HMS Agincourt. Agincourt is the oddball on this list, as it was not initially designed to operate in a major navy, but rather for the Brazilian Navy. But after they failed to finance its construction, the Ottoman Empire intended to buy it, but once when World War I broke out, Britain decided to purchase it for its own navy. Brazil initially wanted a battleship to where their supremacy on the sea would be uncontested by Chile and Argentina, and as a result, they initially wanted a vessel with 12 14-inch guns, later reduced to 8 16-inch guns, but as a result of financial difficulties, they ended up settling on a reduced design with 14 12-inch guns instead. Remarkably, the British designers would manage to place all 14 guns in 7 dual turrets, with all of those turrets being on the central line of the ship, so a broadside of 14 guns could be achieved. Unfortunately, this massive quantity of firepower is where many of the design faults come into play, as in order to achieve such a great quantity of guns, armor had to be sacrificed in most respects. The main belt would have a maximum thickness of 9 inches, the barbettes a maximum thickness of 9 inches, and the decks a maximum thickness of 2.5 inches, but on average they were closer to 1.5 inches. The great quantity of barbettes running through the decks, which resulted in significant openings in the decks, also resulted in a slightly weaker structure in comparison to the average British dreadnought at the time, and this great quantity of weaponry and magazines also resulted in reduced habitability compared to most British dreadnoughts at the time. This vessel certainly would have been impressive within the Brazilian Navy, but in the Royal Navy it was only a handicap. It was not very popular and was often relegated to the back lines. With that, I have covered what I consider to be the 3 worst Dreadnought battleship designs. It does not necessarily mean that these ships were bad or could not function in their intended role, as all of them could certainly do so, but it could be done better by other designs which would be produced by the very navies they served for. With that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.